Was there more to the Mongol Empire than just bloodthirsty conquest? Turns out they were quite a bit more advanced than you might have thought. Born with the name Temujin in 1162, Genghis Khan came into a society divided into often warring tribes.
Feuds among families were very common, and life was extremely uncertain.
Such warfare claimed his father's life before he was 10. He, his mother, and his siblings were cast out from their own clan and left to survive on their own on the steppes. Temujin soon proved himself an adept and ruthless navigator of such a life. He killed his older half-brother to take over his family, escaped when his former clan captured him, and rescued his wife from a raiding party. Along the way, Temujin managed to win himself a devoted following. He broke with tradition by choosing allies based on merit rather than blood relation. Wiping out rival chieftains and incorporating their followers into his own clan, Temujin was well positioned by 1206 to expand his lofty ambitions. He called for a summit of clan chiefs, at which it was agreed that Temujin would be the leader of them all. It was also at that meeting that he became known as Genghis Khan, or universal ruler of the Mongols. In uniting the Mongol tribes, Genghis Khan forged a nation of roughly 1 million. He began state building not long after his ascension, instituting writing systems, a census, and freedom of religion. He also sought to curb further infighting among the Mongols by abolishing contentious hereditary titles of nobility and ending enslavement of fellow Mongols. The first territory outside of the steppes of Mongolia that Genghis Khan targeted for war and conquest was China, specifically the Xia kingdom on the northern border. He was reportedly driven by a sense of divine purpose. Surviving texts claim that Genghis Khan, a follower of Tengriism, believed that he was destined to rule the world. His conviction of divine right may have been sincere, but an imperial endeavor had other appeals, plunder and control of lucrative trade routes among them. A thirst for vengeance against certain rulers and nations also fueled the Mongols' warlust. Whatever the combination of motives, Genghis Khan and his followers didn't stop at Xia. Having incorporated that kingdom into their empire, the Mongols took the Jin dynasty, then moved against Saqqara Khitai and Khiva in Turkestan. Before Genghis Khan's death, the Mongol Empire had pushed its borders up against Persia, Tibet, and Russia, and it would grow considerably larger. Many of the societies subjugated by the Mongols were highly developed and sophisticated. Khiva had an effective irrigation system for its farms, and the Jin dynasty had an impressive administration apparatus. But in the case of China, the strengths of the states were offset by the weakness of division. China at the time existed as two separate entities, the Jin dynasty and the Song Empire. There were also internal divisions within the Jin dynasty, which the Mongols exploited by winning some Jin fighters over to their cause. The Mongols didn't conquer without contest. Armies came out to face them, and many had greater numbers than Genghis Khan. Unrest within the invaded nations could help swell the Mongols' ranks, as could surrender. Those who gave in to the Mongols without a fight could have their soldiers brought into the Mongol forces. But the key to Mongol victories lay in strategy, not numbers. Genghis Khan's well-organized forces made ample use of horsepower. His cavalry, which constituted the bulk of the armies, could move at great speed and to devastating effect over open terrain. With a reputation preceding them, the Mongols would offer their targets a choice of voluntary surrender or utter devastation. In the event of war, bow and arrow assaults let the Mongols strike at a fair distance before moving in to engage the scattered forces of the enemy in close combat. Meanwhile, their own armies maintained an efficient messenger system that let them direct and coordinate movements. Technology also worked in the Mongols' favor. Inventions that we have long taken for granted, like the stirrup, were a boon to their chances. And some of the nations conquered by Mongols had a wealth of skilled artisans, soldiers, and craftsmen who could be conscripted. The aid of such people was invaluable when the Mongols turned to siege warfare. We tend to think of man-made climate change as a modern problem, a consequence of an industrial global civilization.
Nearly half of humanity is living in the danger zone now. Many ecosystems are at the point of no return now.
But human activity was reshaping the Earth well before the internal combustion engine. We've caused climate change since we began practicing agriculture. Farming takes land that in some areas would otherwise be occupied by massive forests that soak up carbon. The conquest of Genghis Khan left vast stretches of territory depopulated. Fields were left unattended, allowing trees to reclaim them. The scale of the Mongol-driven depopulation was so large and it lasted for so long that forests were able to expand to such a degree that the Earth's climate cooled. Researchers from the Carnegie Institution's Department of Global Ecology says that the reforestation indirectly caused by the Mongols absorbed 700 million tons of carbon from the atmosphere, the equivalent of the amount of carbon emitted by burning gasoline every year in modern society. While Genghis Khan still lived, the civil and economic systems of conquered territories were left a loose and often shattered mix, stitched together by the authority of the Khan. but the Mongols were quick in adapting to administration, and in connecting all of their territories through relay stations and mounted envoys, they enabled relatively quick communication. This also helped to facilitate trade, which may have been a driving force behind the Mongol invasions in the first place. Travel and trade also benefited from a period of relative peace and stability after Genghis Khan's death. The years between about 1279 to 1368 have been referred to as Pax Mongolica for the stability within the Mongol Empire, which was partly owed to the way the empire was organized. Once the Mongols took a territory, they built a state apparatus that tended to follow local custom and employ many of the rank and ability from the subjugated people, with a small number of Mongols as the final authority. But Pax Mongolica was paid for by a long and bloody series of wars. The oft-cited statistic of Genghis Khan being responsible for 40 million deaths actually undersells the scale of devastation the Mongol invasions caused. The world population may have fallen by 11% because of them, and entire cultures such as the Xia kingdom were almost completely destroyed. Expansive empires built up through conquest are, almost by their nature, multicultural. As the Mongol Empire expanded, it took on a largely decentralized character. Britannica describes it as less of a Mongol empire than a distinct Chinese, Persian, and Asiatic empires held together under Genghis Khan's dynasty. While early episodes of conquest tried to impose Mongol culture without regard for local tradition or bureaucracy, counselors were drawn from all nations under their control. And as the Mongols moved from subjugation to administration, any given territory's government followed its own custom. Not that such a decentralized arrangement spared any of the peoples from the Mongol Empire from exploitation. Mongol administrators were in every territory, and there was no question who held ultimate authority. The Mongols demanded tribute from their territories, be it taxes, soldiers, scholars, or artisans. How heavy the tribute could depend on the circumstances that brought a territory into the empire. The Kingdom of Armenia voluntarily surrendered to Mongol control and was largely left alone, while others were left with little state to speak of after such an invasion. In such situation, Mongols left in charge had ample opportunity to abuse the local populace. The nature of the local governments appropriated sometimes worked in the Mongols' favor. The strength of the central government in China at the time of its assimilation provided a strong foundation for state building. Beijing, under the name Dadu, became the center of the Mongol Empire under Kublai Khan. Genghis Khan is one of the most notorious warriors and conquerors in world history, with the body count to prove it, and within his lifetime he managed to form an empire that reached the Pacific Ocean on its eastern border and the Caspian Sea on its west.
Wow.
But it was an empire of ruthless subjugation, continual military operation, exploitation by Mongol warlords left in charge of conquered territories, and the Khan's power holding it all together. Genghis Khan was an extraordinary leader, but his empire wouldn't enjoy its Pax Mongolica until several decades after his 1227 death. Nor had the empire reached its greatest territorial extent at that time. 2 years after Genghis Khan's death, he was succeeded by his son Ogedei. It was under Ogedei that the Mongol Empire became the largest contiguous empire in the history of the world. Its western border was pushed as far as Hungary, and its northern border crept into modern-day Russia. Ogedei also moved to increase the presence of government in the conquered territories and connect them. It was he who undertook construction of the relay system. It was also under Ogedei that expansion of the empire halted, at least in the west. His armies retreated from the Hungarian border upon hearing of his death in 1241, halting a potential incursion deeper into Europe. Mind was valued just as much as martial force in the Mongol Empire. Intellectuals among the peoples they conquered were as prized as skilled workers and artisans, and significant advances in technology and mathematics happened under the patronage of the Mongols, if not always directly. Innovation comes through experimentation, and not all experiments work on the first try. So it was with the Mongol Empire's attempt to introduce paper money, made from the bark of mulberry trees. Genghis Khan himself issued the currency in 1227, the same year of his death. His successors continued to innovate by retiring old notes and coins ahead of new issues and establishing a monetary division. Marco Polo counted the currency as among the most remarkable sights he beheld in his travels, but not unlike the modern efforts of the United States to popularize the dollar coin, the Mongols had trouble getting their population to accept the paper money. It wasn't for lack of trying, though.
Show me the money!
Even though the use of the paper notes was compulsory on pain of death, people still didn't buy it. As such, the notes didn't survive the collapse of the Mongol Empire in 1368. Ogedei, Genghis Khan's third-born son, was described by contemporaries as a hard-drinking, harsh man of great passions. He died in 1241 at the age of 55. After Ogedei, heirs to Genghis Khan's throne would regularly find their legitimacy contested. His son Guyuk was elected Great Khan over Batu, the man who would have struck into Western Europe in Ogedei's name had he not died. Keep in mind that Batu was also Genghis Khan's grandson by his eldest son, Jochi. Guyuk died before the tension could create lasting damage to the empire, but the matter of his successor kept the Ogedei and Batu branches of the family in bitter contest. Sorkak Tani Beki, Batu's aunt, outmaneuvered the opposition and clinched the throne for her son, Mongkok. Under him, the Mongols took Baghdad and established territory on the Mediterranean. They also purged his family rivals. When Mongkok died, the next great Khan seemed likely to be either Arghbose or his brother Kublai, sons of Genghis Khan's youngest son. The brothers fought a 4-year civil war for the throne, ending with Kublai's victory in 1264. But he was never elected by a council of nobles, which left his position somewhat suspect among the Mongols even after he became the Great Khan. It's been said that Mongkok Khan, who ruled the empire from 1251 to 1259, was the last great Khan to exercise uncontested rule over the whole of the Mongol Empire. Kublai Khan, his successor, was a capable warrior and statesman, and he did his grandfather one better on the Chinese front by bringing in the southern Song dynasty under Mongol control. But Kublai Khan's reign was contested by some of his subjects and relatives, and the size, diversity, and decentralization of the empire had reached a point where the Great Khan's authority was, in many territories, nominal. Kublai exercised his greatest control over the now unified China, and he came to be seen as primarily a Chinese emperor, the father of the Yuan dynasty, despite trying to maintain Mongol supremacy. He proved adept at reconciling the Chinese to foreign rule, but his extravagance bred resentment. Among his expenses was continued attempts at conquest, which brought no new territory to the Mongol Empire after 1279. They attempted to take Japan on Kublai's orders twice, once in 1276 and again in 1281. Both times, Japan was saved by typhoons. The first killed some 13,000 men who had struck the fleet in Hakata Bay, and the second destroyed nearly half of a 140,000-man force. It remains one of the greatest naval disasters in world history, and it cost Yuan China blood and treasure to no end. The Mongol Empire began to disintegrate after the death of Kublai Khan. His successors were faced with continuing rivalries among Mongol leaders, and many were heavily controlled from a young age by their ministers. In China, where Kublai's Yuan dynasty had its strongest base, the native Chinese culture began to exert itself over Mongol opposition. The Mongol nobility and the agricultural class of China were increasingly hostile to one another. Rebellion grew, and by 1368, the Yuan dynasty had been supplanted by the Ming. The last Yuan ruler fled back to the steppes and died 2 years later. Outside of China, the Mongol Empire fractured into pieces. The most stable was the Golden Horde, created from Western territories that Genghis Khan left his son Juchi to rule. Juchi's son Batu later expanded these holdings considerably. The Golden Horde stretched from Siberia into modern-day Hungary and controlled significant territory around the Black and Caspian Seas. As Kublai Khan and his descendants were influenced by Chinese culture, Batu's descendants were influenced by the Turkic and Islamic peoples they ruled. But the Golden Horde wouldn't outlive the Yuan dynasty for long. It was badly struck by the Black Death, and it suffered military defeats by Russia and by its own allies. The Horde would break up into several smaller states throughout the 1400s. One of its successor khanates, based in the Crimea, absorbed the vestigial rump of the Horde in 1502.